Hi, my name is Becka Crowe, and I run the health and wellness blog Going Grainless. I'm also the co-host of the Vibe Tribe Wellness podcast. Thank you so much for joining us this evening as we talk about a very important topic, digestion. Tonight we'll chat about some common digestive issues like leaky gut, IBS, and the importance of nourishing your microbiome, as well as foods that you can eat to achieve optimal gut health. So today I'd love to introduce holistic nutritional consultant Tracey. She is also an instructor at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, as well as a graduate from there.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here tonight. As Becca mentioned, I'm a holistic nutritional consultant. I got my education at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, and currently I'm an instructor at the Calgary location.
Well, we're so excited to be chatting with you today, Tracey. And just to keep in mind for everyone, we'll be taking your questions all the way through. You can just send them in, and we'll be putting them in throughout the conversation. So I'd love to get started. I can't wait to hear more of what you have to say about this topic. So before we get too into it, can you tell us about your path getting into nutrition? What made you decide to get into this career and jumpstart it?
Yeah, so I think the seed was planted at a really young age. I had an uncle who had a brain tumor, and he had had multiple surgeries, and they were never able to get the tumor out. So he finally went for a really radical diet and lifestyle change and was able to get rid of the tumor. So from a really young age, I understood the power of diet to make changes in health. And then fast forward a few decades, and I was parenting my 3 kids. My youngest son was adopted and was having a lot of issues, was really delayed developmentally, but we were dealing with behavioral issues every day, a lot of tantruming. And so really I needed a break, and I needed to do something for myself. And so that seed that had been planted all those years ago germinated, and I really wanted to study nutrition, and I went to CSNN to do that. And then what was sort of ironic is that even though I had done that to get away from my son, ultimately what I learned provided the foundation to help my son and dietary change benefit him.
That's so great that you were able to use what you were learning and in the end help him out as well, even though you were kind of on your own journey to start. So you're very much connected with CSNN. You teach at the Calgary, Alberta location. So what has your experience at CSNN, why has it been so important to you to continue teaching outside of just your day-to-day working with clients?
Yes, so I loved being at CSNN. Being in a classroom with people that share the same passion as you is it's just really motivational. So it was a really good experience being there. Within weeks of being in the classroom, I knew I wanted to be at the front. I have a B.Ed, and I've taught a variety of things over the years. And so I finished at CSNN, started a clinical practice, did that for a couple of years, and then I started to realize I had some really interesting clinical experience that I thought would benefit the students. And so then I was able to bring those 2 passions together, my love of teaching with my love of nutrition. And I'm really grateful to be at CSNN and being able to do that.
I love that. So digestive issues seem to be a big thing with almost everyone these days.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what are some of the most common digestive issues that you find with your clients?
Yeah, so I think probably the number 1 issue would be bloating. And bloating can look really different from person to person. So some people can have burping, flatulence, but some people just have this distended feeling in their abdomen.
I totally had that.
Yeah, so it's just this uncomfortable distension. And then I also see, and I think my practice is maybe a little bit unique in this, but I see a lot of people dealing with abdominal pain. So chronic pain where they've been to their family doctors and nobody's been able to really help them address that pain.
That sounds so much of what I went through, so I'm excited to see what else you have to say here. So before the Facebook Live, we actually did a nutrition assessment on my past history, and IBS is something that I dealt with for a long time, so I'd love to be able to learn more about your holistic approach as far as dealing with those issues.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of focus in on a few things that came up with your filling out those forms. So you've had gut issues for most of your life, it sounds like. So can you just briefly tell us about those?
Yeah, so I was born prematurely, about 5 weeks early. So I think it started from that day, basically. Growing up, I was always sick. I had asthma. I was always on antibiotics. And then as I got older, I was having those digestive issues. I was getting very bloated, having the pain. And then when I hit 21, I hit almost my own kind of rock bottom. I was eating really bad. I was a student, and my digestive issues had just gone out of control.
And you had also talked about being ill a lot during your childhood. Can you maybe describe what that was like and maybe what approach the medical community provided?
Yeah. So I probably had the flu at least once a year. I was always getting the flu shot, still getting the flu. Colds were like all the time. And the most common thing was being put on antibiotics. Also, strep throat actually was another really big one, and again, antibiotics.
Yeah.
So I would say that was every time I would go see my doctor, I would just expect to get another prescription of that.
Okay, yeah. And then when you hit that all-time low in your 20s, what was kind of happening, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, so that's the point where I got like the extreme bloating, I had acid reflux, I had extreme pain. I had anxiety, which I later realized was very much connected to that. It was pretty much just every symptom that I had earlier in my life, I just had like exploded, and it was an everyday issue.
Yeah. So from what Becca's told me, she's had quite a few factors that have kind of developed into what was her IBS. So I'm going to kind of try to recap some of the ones that are really common that we see, obviously in Becca's case, but also in a lot of other people's cases. So being a preemie, definitely the gut isn't fully formed yet, so that was really key early on. But then the repeated use of antibiotics throughout her childhood, the poor diet that she was eating growing up, and then the pharmaceutical use, just overall, in addition to antibiotics, that can really have a negative impact on the gut microbiome. And so we see that those are some of the common contributing factors to IBS. A lot of different things can put stress on the digestive system. And so what Becca has described, the symptoms she's described, even the neurological symptoms like anxiety, really, really common when we're looking at gut issues and IBS in particular.
So one thing about this then, is it possible for people to have digestive issues without any symptoms?
Yes, very good question, absolutely. So there are obviously these like severe digestive issues where people have symptoms, but then there's this whole other side where people are actually having a lot going on in the gut, and they just won't have symptoms that are gut related. So the best examples would be autoimmune conditions or neurological conditions. And I'll give you some really good examples. So I had a client, she had an autoimmune condition, and I've heard this multiple times from various clients, but we got her on some dietary changes, and then a month later she came back and she said, I didn't even know I had bloating until I changed my diet, and then the bloating went down. So that's something I really commonly hear. And then another really good example would be where people have digestive issues, but they're sort of managing them, so they don't think they have them.
They just think it's a normal thing.
Well, yes, I'll give you another good example. So like somebody will, say, do you have any digestive issues? No, everything's good. And then later on I might ask, are there any foods you avoid? Oh yeah, I don't eat bananas. Well, why don't you eat bananas? Well, they give me heartburn. So yeah, you've got some digestive issues, you're just avoiding the foods that trigger them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. We actually have a question from Sebastian saying that they suffer from a dairy sensitivity, but also have a sweet tooth. So what can they alleviate to get rid of this reaction in their stomach?
Other than avoid dairy and sugar.
Those are such big ones.
Yeah, so I mean, avoidance is really the best way to do that. You can also work with a practitioner who can kind of help you to customize things and really look at where the digestive function is impaired and help you to support exactly where the problem is in your digestive system.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And that's the thing is food sensitivities are sometimes the root cause for digestive issues.
Definitely, yeah.
So what are some foods that tend to be a common problem for people?
Okay, so dairy is definitely one of the most common ones. In addition to dairy, we see wheat being really common, soy, corn, and also nightshades. And nightshades is a family of foods. We have some of them actually right here today: eggplant, tomatoes, peppers, goji berries would fit into this category as well, and potatoes. So those would be common food sensitivities. And often the reason, there's varied reasons people can react, but a lot of the reactions are an IgG food type of sensitivity.
So interesting. Just for a second, I do want to mention if anyone does have any questions, to please send them through and we'll make sure that we answer them as best as we can here. And we actually have another one that came in. So from Corona, I don't want to mess up the name, sorry. Becca mentioned anxiety affecting her digestion. Can you talk a little bit more about that link?
Okay, so digestion and anxiety, it's actually cyclical. So when we look at people who struggle with anxiety, we often see that the gut microbiome is imbalanced. It's not in a healthy state. And then that actually impacts neurotransmitter production, and that can affect anxiety. But then we also see that once people have anxiety, that can actually negatively impact digestion as well. So people will just get, and this applies to anybody. When you get nervous, you might get, flutters and butterflies in your stomach. So that's kind of an example of where the brain is affecting the gut. Anxiety, there's this kind of cyclical thing happening where it's bidirectional.
I like how you mentioned that with like the flutters, because for years I thought that was just like a normal thing to feel all the time. And then when I started changing my diet and it started going away, I was like, whoa, that wasn't normal. So I think it's a thing that a lot of people don't recognize.
Yeah.
So what are some foods that you would recommend for people to incorporate into their diet to help aid with digestion?
Okay, so this actually gets really individualized. But I'll give you an example, pineapple, and we've got a beautiful pineapple here this evening. So pineapple contains bromelain, which is an enzyme that can help with digestion. And so for some people, pineapple is going to be really good for supporting digestion. But interestingly, and I don't know if this is just a reflection of my practice, but a lot of my clients come into me with their test results for IgG food sensitivities. And I have seen a lot of people who are really, extremely reactive to pineapple. So again, I don't know if that's just a reflection of the group of people I'm working with, but I tend to shy away from pineapple because I've seen so many people who have really severe IgG reactions. So that's kind of where things start to get really customized. But then on kind of a general sense, a lot of people will do lemon juice and water in the morning to stimulate digestion. Apple cider vinegar is another great thing. And then maybe not quite as commonly used, sauerkraut juice can stimulate digestion.
I didn't know that one.
Yeah.
It's in my fridge at home, so good to know.
Yeah.
And so we have another question that came in as well. So in this one, they have H. pylori and bloating with a bladder infection. So what do you recommend would be a good diet for that? Like an elimination diet or something along those lines?
So H. pylori with bladder infection. Okay, so in a situation like this, we know the gut microbiome is imbalanced. So H. pylori can be part of a normal, healthy gut microbiome. But when somebody has an infection, it means that that particular organism is in sort of an overgrowth state. And then bladder infections reflect kind of the same thing that's happening in the bladder. So the microbiome in the bladder will be imbalanced. And so there's more of these sort of pathogenic organisms. So I wish I had a simple answer for you. I don't. Yes, so it would be really specific dietary protocols that are going to be focused on restoring the microbiome as a whole.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So actually, this is a question that I've been wondering myself, is the order that you eat your foods in, like on your plate, does that affect your digestion?
I think it does to some extent,
Okay.
but more importantly would be something called food combining.
Okay.
And food combining is just a way of combining foods to ease digestion. And I'll give you just some really quick examples. So if you're eating a steak, you would never want to eat that steak with potatoes or bread or pasta. So
Which I feel like is a very common thing
yes,
to eat it with.
yeah. So you want to keep those kind of carbs, those starchy foods away from animal proteins.
Okay.
And then sort of conversely, so what you would eat your steak with would be like a nice leafy green salad or maybe asparagus or something. And then we also see like grains and legumes are a really good combination. But really the most important thing I think is keeping those like starchy foods away from the animal proteins.
Okay, awesome,
Yeah.
good to know. So what are other things you would try outside of food to support the digestive system?
Okay, so outside of food, definitely eating in a relaxed manner is going to be really, really important. So eating on the run doesn't support digestion because we can't be doing something physical and be digesting.
Right. I feel like that's what a lot of people are doing these days, eating in their car.
It's pervasive
Yeah.
in our society, right? You walk down the street and there are people eating or drinking something. Or I have a lot of clients that have desk jobs and they sit at their, like they're trying to work and eat at the same time.
The whole multitasking thing where you don't even realize that you ate your whole meal.
Yeah. So really, really important to be in a relaxed state. And so again, like with my clients who have these desk jobs, I say to them, you know what, like just take that time, put your work aside, maybe close your eyes for a minute, take a few deep breaths just to bring yourself into that relaxed state so you can digest.
Okay.
What was the question?
Sorry, what are some things outside of food that you can use to support your digestive system?
Yeah, so that would be kind of a lifestyle factor. And then I think we also have supplements that can be used for people who have like dysfunction in their digestive system.
Right.
And really important then to work with a practitioner and make sure you're getting the supplement that is actually going to support the area of digestion.
Okay. So could that be something like probiotics or something like that?
Yeah, it would be more along the lines of like a digestive enzyme.
Okay.
Or
And again, very specialized depending on the person.
Yeah.
So we have another question in from Lindsay. What are the long-term effects on your digestive system when you're eating excessive sugar, which I think is a big one for a lot of people?
Yeah, so excessive sugar really impacts the microbiome negatively. And so what excessive sugar is doing, I mean, one, it has no nutrients attached to it. And so your body actually has to metabolize sugar, it has to actually draw nutrients from elsewhere in the body to be able to metabolize it. But what sugar does is it actually feeds the pathogenic species in your gut microbiome. And so then it doesn't feed the good guys. So it can really create this shift where the pathogenic species become more problematic.
Yeah, got to cut back on all that white sugar. It's hard though these days with all the products out there. Even a lot of the natural products makes it very difficult with the hidden forms of sugar in there.
Yeah.
So myself having a gluten sensitivity as well as many others these days, what are some signs and symptoms of a gluten sensitivity?
So gluten sensitivity, I think we need to differentiate between celiac disease and a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So signs and symptoms of celiac are incredibly broad-ranging. So traditionally, what doctors kind of looked for was diarrhea, a lot of weight loss, malnutrition, because celiac people were having trouble absorbing the nutrients. But we've started in the last few years to really understand that it's much, much broader than that. I've seen people who just have like mouth ulcers, for example. So really, really different from having, these digestive issues. Some people will have like brain fog. Some people might have nerve pain. So it can be really, really broad ranging. And with celiac disease, people are reacting to very specific components in gluten.
Right.
So there's an alpha, gliadin, transglutaminase 2. Those would kind of be what they're typically reacting to. Then with the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, again, really, really broad-ranging symptoms. A really common one would be fatigue.
Right. Yeah, I definitely experience that. If I get like a little bit of gluten in my meal at a restaurant or something, I can tell the next day. If I don't get those physical symptoms, it's the brain fog and exhaustion.
Yeah. And what we're seeing now is that the research is supporting a correlation between non-celiac gluten sensitivity and a lot of neurological conditions. So we have research supporting correlation with things like autism and ADHD, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and then even things like depression and anxiety.
Wow. Going through it, I believe it, but it's so crazy when you hear like all those other conditions
Yeah.
that could potentially be linked to that.
Yeah.
So outside of gluten, dairy is also a huge issue for many people. So why do so many people have issues with dairy these days?
Yeah, so dairy, like gluten, is really, really complex. You can be reacting to a whole bunch of different things. So people can have like an IgG reaction to dairy. They can have a true allergy to dairy. Then there's like lactose intolerance where you just can't break down the sugars in dairy. But when we ultimately ask, like, why are people reacting to dairy, and the same thing with gluten, why are people reacting? It really comes down to the health of the gut. So both the health of the microbiome and the health of the tissue itself. So people may have leaky gut. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to touch more on that, which is another good topic. Before we do, though, we just have another question from Vlado. So what are natural remedies for acid reflux?
Well, so when I'm working with people that have acid reflux, I don't necessarily work with remedies because a remedy is just going to manage symptoms.
Right, like you're right, just like going and getting a pill or something.
Yeah,
for it,
yeah. And so my approach with acid reflux, again, is really to look at what is happening further down in the GI tract that is causing that acid reflux, and then addressing the root cause.
Again, another issue. I was on PPIs for a little bit. I think I forgot to mention that one to you.
Yeah.
But I think it really messed up my system in the end, and it was going through food and all of that and figuring out what works with my body.
And PPIs will negatively impact the microbiome. So short term, they're managing the symptoms, but long term, they're actually feeding into it and perpetuating the problem.
Yeah, as I learned more about that, I was like, oh my gosh, what was I on at 15 years old?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Another question that we have from Amanda is, do you recommend probiotic supplements?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, they're... Because gut health is underlying almost all chronic health conditions, really important supplement that can just help to benefit like any symptoms. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
I also like even just like in like a kombucha or something, getting it that way.
Yeah,
it's like
for
great.
sure.
There's so many ways to
get it. Yeah,
get
there's
it.
a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Another question that we have, kind of going back to eating on the run and maybe not being able to control your situation. What is the best practice for digestion for when you're on the go and you can't control what you're eating?
I think when you can't control what you're eating, just making the best choices that you can. A good backup plan might be to have some digestive enzymes with you if you know you're going to be eating something that maybe you don't tolerate well or can't digest well. Then digestive enzymes can, for some people, really help to manage.
Yeah, just a great thing to keep as you're out on the run and everything.
Yeah.
So with that as well then, so the microbiome, it's become a very popular term in the whole gut and wellness community. So for those who don't know what the microbiome is, can you explain more about it and kind of tell us exactly what it is?
Yeah, I love talking about the microbiome. It's my passion. Basically, what I do with people is I teach them how to eat to feed their microbiomes. So the microbiome are these organisms that live in our GI tract. We have about 130 trillion of them living in our guts. They perform a lot of really, really important functions for our body. And what's kind of cool is that for every cell that we have in our bodies, we have an organism living in our gut. And so we're really only half human.
I've heard that. That's crazy. It's so crazy.
Yeah, and then even more staggering, for every cell, the genetic material that's in that cell, we have about 150 times the genetic material in our gut microbiome.
Wow.
And it's thought that that is really what makes us as complex as we are as humans. So the microbiome, I think the most concise thing I can say about the benefits of the microbiome is that these organisms affect every single metabolic process in our bodies. And when the microbiome becomes imbalanced, so when we see that the ratio of beneficial to pathogenic species, if there's some kind of shift in there, we call it dysbiosis. And so I'll probably bring up dysbiosis again as the evening progresses.
Awesome. So we do have another question because we were talking, as I kind of mentioned, kombucha really quick, which is a fermented food. So Christina is asking what fermented foods help the gut and how?
Yeah, so we have a lot of great fermented foods. We've got some of them here this evening. In the jars in front of you, we have kefir, and we have some kombucha as well. So both of those foods are really rich in probiotics. And it helps because it's adding beneficial organisms to your gut microbiome. So our gut microbiome it's a whole bunch of different organisms, most of them being beneficial or kind of neutral, and then these pathogenic ones. So when we eat these foods that are rich in probiotic foods, they add beneficial species into our guts.
Something like kefir, what is, how is that more beneficial than, say, just like regular yogurt?
Good question. So yogurt will typically have about 3 to 5 strains of organisms in it. Kefir can have up to 15.
Oh, wow, okay.
And in addition to the beneficial bacteria, it also has some beneficial yeasts. And so this can be really important because a lot of people have heard of candida overgrowth.
Yes.
So candida is a yeast, and having other beneficial yeasts will help to crowd out the candida.
Okay. So actually that's a question that I have is I've kind of heard mixed things about it, that if you're on a candida cleanse, that you shouldn't be having fermented foods. What are your thoughts on that?
I use fermented foods in my protocols.
Okay.
But I think probably my protocol looks a little bit different than a traditional candida protocol.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very much about the fermented foods too. So I've done candida and I've still included those in, and I thought it worked, but you always kind of hear the different
Well, and
things.
it's very individual too,
Yeah.
right? Like some people will be able to tolerate them much better than others.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Everything is all individualized. So earlier we brought up the leaky gut, and so we want to get into that a little bit more. So can you tell us exactly what it is and how you can kind of deal with some symptoms of it?
Yeah, yeah. So leaky gut is happening in the small, well, what we would associate with leaky gut is happening in the small intestine. So the small intestine is kind of in the middle of your abdomen. It's about 20 feet long. And so what happens is we have these cells in our small intestine, and between the cells are these structures. They're called tight junctions, and they hold those cells together. And so with leaky gut, those tight junctions have opened up, and then we have these gaps in between cells. So the small intestine actually is leaking. It becomes permeable because of these gaps between cells. So what's happening with leaky gut then is toxins and undigested food particles are leaking through the gut. And when they leak through the gut, our immune system doesn't recognize what
they're
they
like foreign
are.
objects going into your body. Yeah.
So then our immune system has a response to those things. And any immune response will have inflammation as part of that response. So when we're talking about leaky gut, it's that cascade of the permeability, things leaking through, and then the inflammation that results from that.
And then the inflammation could be all these other symptoms that
Exactly.
people are feeling.
Yeah, yeah. So inflammation can show up anywhere. It could be joint pain. It could be brain issues. It can be skin conditions. It's very, very vast ranging.
That's so interesting. I feel like a lot of people too, skin conditions are a big one that I think a lot of people don't realize are related
to the gut,
to what they're eating.
Yeah.
And so I do have one more question coming in from Linda, just kind of going back to IBS a little bit. What are some natural remedies for IBS?
IBS is super, super complex. Again, when we're looking at kind of managing IBS, there's a protocol called low FODMAPs, which I think we'll be getting into a little bit more later, but that can really help manage symptoms. But with IBS, it's really important that you have a good practitioner that can help you kind of dig into the root causes of it, because until those root causes are addressed, again, like the question we had earlier about acid reflux, just putting a remedy on it is sort of a Band-Aid solution.
Right.
So it's really about digging deeper and figuring out what is contributing to those symptoms.
Working with someone who can do that individualized thing for you, for sure. And so with IBS, for something very basic, like are there certain foods that people should be eliminating from their diet, or is that, again, something that's more individualized as far as the person?
So I've touched on kind of a low FODMAP diet that can help manage IBS. But I think in my experience, grains tend to be pretty problematic. Sugars obviously are going to be hugely problematic, so those need to be avoided as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then kind of going into what your body might be sensitive to, is it possible to overcome or reverse a food sensitivity?
Yes, absolutely. So when we talked about leaky gut and how those junctions open up and undigested food particles leak through, that is when you're having a food sensitivity reaction, so these IgG types of reactions. So if you can repair a leaky gut and create a good seal, a barrier there, then you stop those food sensitivity reactions.
Okay, so it's all about healing and then introducing those foods back
Yeah.
in. Okay, awesome. So sometimes we eat, we read that 3 meals a day are best for you, but then from other people we hear 6 meals a day are better. I'm personally probably more of the 6 meal a day person, but I've heard that's probably not the best. So I would love to hear what you think about that.
No, that's a great question. So I think ultimately what we want is 3 meals a day. And I'll explain why. So when we eat food, we have in our small intestine, we have this sort of normal peristaltic action. And that's kind of it's like a churning to help mix the food, but it's also pushing the food through the intestines.
Right.
And there's something that happens 4 to 5 hours after we eat.
45 hours.
4 to 5.
Oh, 4 to 5. Yeah. Okay, I heard that wrong.
4 to 5 hours after we eat.
Makes more sense.
And it's this, the neurons fire the patterns called the migrating motor complex. And so it's different from normal peristalsis in that it's just this kind of wave-like contraction that is, that cleans out the intestine. So its function is to like clear out debris.
Okay.
Now, if you snack in those 4 or 5 hours, that migrating motor complex doesn't get triggered, and that doesn't happen.
So you're pretty much missing a step of the
you're
process
missing
because
a
there's
step.
always food going through.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's really important then, an ideal, again, this is the ideal, is to have your meals 4 or 5 hours apart so that that migrating motor complex gets triggered and stimulated. Having said that, there are a lot of conditions where people need to be eating these smaller, more frequent
low blood
meals.
sugar,
Yeah, low
things
blood
like
sugar, heartburn. If people have nausea, then it's really important to manage those symptoms while you address what's happening at the root cause level. And then the idea is that the long-term goal then becomes 3 meals a day.
Ideally 3, but it could change depending on what your situation
Yes.
is. Okay, I'll have to work on that. We had another question come in. So is it true that chia seeds can help with IBS and other colon problems?
So again, I think it kind of depends what's going on in your gut. So chia seeds are good in both soluble and insoluble fiber, and that's where they would sort of be of benefit. If you have IBS that is diarrhea dominant, then you don't want to be adding that extra fiber because it can actually irritate the gut and contribute to diarrhea.
Okay, so yeah, again, very individualized, but it could be a good option.
Yeah.
Another question coming in, Dominique, do you find that hydrochloric acid and digestive enzyme supplements are best, that they work the best for majority of your clients, or would you recommend other things?
You know what, it's pretty specific to the person. I would say with autoimmune conditions, digestive enzymes are really important.
Okay.
Something like betaine, I would only be using on somebody if they have symptoms of having low stomach acidity.
Okay.
Yeah, so again, it's you really kind of want to be targeting things based on symptoms.
What are some symptoms of low acidity in the stomach?
So sometimes if people eat meat, they'll have a really heavy feeling. If people get a lot of bloating and burping like fairly soon after eating a meal, that can be a symptom as well.
Okay, so you'll feel something, and then that's just going and getting checked.
Yeah,
out
and even
kind of seeing what's
heartburn.
going
Actually,
on.
heartburn can also actually mean you've got low stomach
Oh,
acidity.
that's so interesting because you would assume you had more because you're getting that sensation.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question coming in, Cheryl, are there any remedies for gas pains after eating something that affects you almost immediately?
So if you're getting gas pain almost immediately after eating, I think there's some really important questions to ask. One would be, is your stomach acid low? But then there can be a lot more complex things going on. What would particularly come to mind is a condition called SIBO. SIBO is an acronym. It's SIBO. It stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And for people who have this, we often see that they become bloated really, really quickly after eating.
Interesting. So going back to eating behaviors, I've heard that digestion, it begins in the mouth. So how is that related to the way that people are chewing their food or drinking with meals and things like that?
Okay, well, I'm going to differ and say that it actually begins in the brain.
Okay, fair.
So think about, and all of you watching, imagine, close your eyes, imagine your favorite meal. So maybe somebody else is preparing it for you, maybe it's at a restaurant, and just thinking about that meal, visualizing it, anticipating it. It's really that anticipation that starts you salivating. Right? So in the brain, it's that anticipation that starts you salivating. So saliva is really important because it contains a digestive enzyme called amylase. And so it's really important that you get that amylase mixed in with your food, which is why chewing is so important. So if you have a smoothie for breakfast, you still need to be chewing.
I've heard that.
Yeah, just mix in that saliva a little bit.
I was told like ideally you should have like 30 chews like
per mouthful.
And I was like, I tried it and I was like, that is the hardest thing I've ever tried.
Yeah, so but chewing is really important. And then with drinking, you want to do most of your drinking away from meals. Because drinking is just going to dilute all of your digestive secretions, like both in your saliva and your stomach. So, maybe just having a little bit of liquid with your meals.
It's actually reminded me of something like years and years ago. I heard like a dieting type thing, and I was like, you drink a bunch of water before your meal
to fill up your stomach.
Is that a real thing?
Oh, yeah, it is for
but you don't recommend it.
No, not from a digestive
standpoint. No, that's what I was getting at. I don't think it's actually good for you.
No.
Okay. So a question from Danny. Sometimes it's hard to get all your digestive nutrients from foods. So what type of supplements would you recommend to take on a daily basis to aid in digestion?
To aid in digestion, so I think, some of the things we talked about earlier, so the lemon juice in water, apple cider vinegar in water, that can just start to stimulate digestion. But I think, if you're looking for your nutrients, like a good quality multivitamin mineral is going to be really good. But just trying to really optimize that from food, I think, is going to be the most.
Food is still like the best place to get it from.
Yeah.
And I guess if you're not, then that's when you go to the supplement route. But
and the key with getting it from food is that you need a healthy gut to be doing that, right?
Because you're not absorbing it properly. Then going back to the whole leaky gut thing.
Yeah.
So another question we have in from Vlado. My wife has a lot of hot flashes from medications that she's on. Are there any foods that she can eat to help with the symptoms?
Oh, I think it would be, the first thing that comes to mind would be more about avoidance. So red wine can sometimes trigger hot flashes. Sometimes carbonated drinks do. So it would involve a little bit of troubleshooting to try to see if any foods are actually triggering.
Or spicy food. I feel like spicy food sounds like something like that too.
Not that I'm aware of, but it's possible. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So also too, what are some things that impact digestion besides food? So are there triggers like your lifestyle habits or injuries? We kind of touched on that, but can you get into that a bit more?
Yeah, so definitely, eating when you're relaxed, we touched on that. But when we talk about injuries, there are a couple of really significant things. If anybody's had any kind of abdominal surgery, that can actually impact digestion because you can get scar tissue where the digestive tissue then has adhesions as a result. So then that can impact digestion. So that would be something that could impact digestion. We also see like traumatic brain injury can impact digestion. And that's where the signaling from the brain to the digestive system becomes compromised.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like sports, right? A lot of people playing sports get head injuries, concussion. So if you have a history of something like that, that could definitely impact your digestion.
What about just like something as simple as stress?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Or like, I think that's a big one for a lot of people.
Yes, so stress sends your energy into your extremities, right? It's that fight or flight response. And whether you choose to fight or flee, historically, when we were like hunter-gatherers, we don't really fight or flee anymore. But it would have meant that all your energy had to go into your muscles to be able to do that.
Right.
So then when that happens, the energy's all out here. There's nothing really supporting the digestive tract.
So these days, our system still just doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I think that's
stress
a
is huge. Yeah,
for a lot of people.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that one up.
So another question that came in from Harriet, is there any link between sleep and digestion? Are there any foods that you can eat right before bed to help with digestion?
So there's definitely a correlation between sleep and digestion. Sleep has a really profound effect on our microbiome. And so it's really important to get good sleep, kind of follow our natural circadian rhythms to support the health of our microbiome, which also supports digestion. Foods that would specifically support digestion during sleep, I don't know that anything comes to mind off the top of my head, but certainly some people sleep better if they have a carbohydrate with their dinner.
I've heard that actually. I've heard, or having like even like a bit of a banana or something like closer to bedtime. I heard if you're waking up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or whatever, it could potentially be your body waking you
and
up.
sometimes that just means like maybe a sweet potato with dinner. Like it doesn't have to be anything crazy.
Okay.
But definitely people sometimes find that having that carb with dinner can help with sleep.
Okay. And the thing is, too, like a lot of people like to snack closer to bed. Is that like a thing that you should stay away from?
You should stay away from doing it close to bedtime, because ideally what you want your body to be doing while you're sleeping is not to have to work on digestion, but to kind of be focused more on detoxing and doing other kind of cleanup jobs. Not
your body's kind of
necessarily
like shutting down, taking that refuel for overnight.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we've mentioned a few different diets, such as the GAPS diet and the low FODMAP diet. There's paleo. There's so many different diets out there. So can you shed some light on some of these popular ones?
So the GAPS diet and the low FODMAP diet, I think are really important when we're talking about digestive health. So the GAPS diet, GAPS is an acronym. It stands for the Gut and Psychology Syndrome Diet. And so the premise of the GAPS diet is that if you restore the health of the gut, then it will positively impact brain health.
Okay.
And this is actually the protocol that I used with my son, and I'm certified in this protocol. So it's sort of this gut-brain connection is kind of the underlying premise. But it's really about repairing leaky gut and feeding the microbiome back to a healthy state.
Right.
A low FODMAPs diet, so again, it's an acronym. I'm not going to go into the acronym, but basically what you need to know about FODMAPs is that FODMAPs are food for your microbiome. So then I think the question that comes up is then why would you do low FODMAPs?
Right.
So a little anatomy lesson here. But most of your microbiome lives in your large intestine. So your large intestine kind of snakes up around here. And so it's kind of like dense city population, right? So that's where you have this like really dense population. And then in contrast, your small intestine should have a very negligible population.
Right.
So it's like comparing city to farmland, right? So really dense population in the large intestine, low population in the small intestine. And so low FODMAPs works when we have an overgrowth in the small intestine. So I've talked about SIBO. So when people have SIBO, and often this is correlated to IBS, the research is showing a really, really high correlation. So if there's an overgrowth in the small intestine, then going low FODMAP starves out the organisms in the small intestine.
Oh, interesting.
But it also starves out in the large intestine.
Okay.
So really, really useful diet to manage IBS or SIBO, but long-term problematic in the large intestine.
Awesome. And so for someone who has digestive issues and they're going on these diets, is there a certain amount of time or is it very individualized?
It's pretty individualized. I only like to use low FODMAPs, as I said, to kind of manage symptoms until root causes can be addressed.
Okay.
It's super individualized. With my son on the GAPS diet, so he had celiac disease, a lot of damage in the gut. It was really 3 years on that diet before we could introduce anything that wasn't part of that protocol.
I always like to ask that just because, like, when you think of diets, people are like, oh,
They
that's
always think
6 week
short-term,
fix, all those different things.
yeah.
But yeah, to like really get your system back on track, it does take time.
And I think it's important to understand, like, people, it can take decades for these serious chronic health conditions to occur. So then to expect that, like, in 6 weeks or 3 months, you're going to reverse decades worth of damage.
So you have to be patient and willing to put in that work.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have a couple questions that came in. So from Temi, do you think magnesium supplements or turmeric would help people who have IBS? And would you consider IBS an inflammatory disease?
Yeah, I would consider IBS to be inflammatory, even though it's not necessarily inflammatory by the measures that the medical community is using. Again, supplementation is really individualized. I would never want to use magnesium for somebody who had like a diarrhea dominant IBS. Certainly if you have a constipation dominant IBS, it can help to like stimulate regular motility. And turmeric is very anti-inflammatory, works for a lot of people, but unbeknownst to a lot of people, it's a very common IgG sensitivity. So there are people who actually react to turmeric. So again, can be really individualized.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because you hear so much about turmeric these days.
Yeah.
So people still have to be careful about that.
Yeah, for sure.
So another question that we have from Melissa is, I have a lot of stomach acid and it's depleted my gut flora and lining to the point that I've developed hiatal, I don't even know. Hiatal hernia. Sorry, guys. What are some natural things that I can do to repair?
So again, I would really be questioning whether it is actually high acidity versus low acidity, because with the hiatal hernia, I would expect to actually see low acidity. And so what happens with low acidity is that we actually need a certain amount of acidity to signal the sphincter at the top of our stomach to close.
Okay.
And if we don't have enough acidity, that won't close. And so then the acid goes up and people have like heartburn and acid reflux. So again, like it's really about kind of going to the root cause, which is the health of the microbiome. Is there leaky gut present? But really definitely dysbiosis we would expect to be present, so really addressing that. And then the actual hernia itself, going to see like an osteopath or a massage therapist that does visceral manipulation to try to work that hernia down.
Okay, yeah. So with a lot of these things, it's like you kind of have your army of people to go see. It might not always just be that one person.
It's really about having kind of this team of practitioners.
Absolutely. So another question from Cheryl, do you suggest people take a prebiotic along with a probiotic?
So, very good question. Ideally, you want to be getting your prebiotics from vegetables.
Yeah, I was going to say, so what exactly is a prebiotic?
So a prebiotic feeds the probiotics. So it's food for the probiotics. So I think ideally you want to be getting that from natural whole food. And vegetables is going to, I think, be the best source of that. But if, say, you had a really picky eater who just didn't eat a lot of vegetables, then that might be a situation where I'd want a prebiotic supplement specifically.
Okay, so again, try to get it through food. But if not, prebiotics are always a great option as well. So another question is, I was recently told I have H. pylori and I've taken 2 weeks of antibiotics. So what can I eat to help with the healing of this?
So really focusing on some of these probiotic-rich foods to, especially after antibiotic use.
I also just got off some with a surgery that I had. And
so getting lots of probiotics in there and even supplementing with a fairly high dose at this point is going to be really important.
Okay.
And then, a lot of those like prebiotic foods, because taking a supplement is a temporary modification. And almost any supplement on the bottle, it will tell you that, for temporary modification of gut flora. So still really, really useful, especially after antibiotic use, but really, really important to really focus on a diet that's really going to restore the gut microbiome overall.
Okay, awesome. And so another question that came in is, what are some reasons for gas in the early morning, even before eating or drinking?
Oh, the first thing that would come to mind is SIBO.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, this is the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Okay.
And for people that I see in my practice, if they're waking up and that bloating is already there, usually that's what I send them to a naturopathic doctor actually to get tested for that. Yeah.
Okay, for that specifically. Yeah. And how long does it take to see a difference in bloating if nightshades are avoided?
Well, it varies from person to person. But usually if you're taking out an offending food, it will be in a fairly short period of time, like within days.
Like you start noticing the difference if you're not eating any of them and you're not getting that
bloating.
bloating.
And sometimes it can take a few weeks, right? Because just to kind of bring the inflammation down to rectify those symptoms.
Okay. Another question that came in, and actually I'm curious about this myself, from Shay. Can charcoal help your gut? I know it's like very detoxifying, but can it do something for the gut as well?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's primarily a detoxifier,
Okay.
so it can help to kind of bind to toxins in the gut and help. Well, you know what? It can stimulate bowel movements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it could be used.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of questions about prebiotics. So when would be the best time to take a probiotic?
So probiotics should be taken during a meal. And so for a long time, we were always told to take prebiotics before eating.
Right.
So the idea was get them in the system because stomach acidity can kill a lot of the organisms.
Okay.
But what we now know is that food acts as a buffer against the acidity. So kind of in the middle of your meal or towards the end of your meal. So you've got that buffer in there.
Okay. And do you suggest like morning or night, or it's more just with a meal?
Yeah, more just with a meal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so kind of going back to the nightshades, we have another question. What type of cuisines have the closest ties to nightshades? Do you have any quick remedies?
Oh, Italian, right? All those tomatoes.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of like Central American cultures are using a lot of peppers, right? The chili peppers, right?
We have all our nightshades right there.
Yeah, and it's all those seasoning peppers. It's the
Right.
paprika and the chilies and the jalapenos, right? All of these kind of...
Yeah, it's all those things you
Yeah.
don't even think of, all
Yeah.
those little additives for taste
Yeah,
and
so
flavor.
there are actually quite a few cultures that are
Okay.
utilizing them, in various ways.
Okay, that's so interesting. Yeah, I would have never thought, like, as you said, like the paprika and things like
Yeah.
that. And so, are there any ways that we can digest food better if you're eating something similar or the same meals every day?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think a lot of people that are having digestive issues, they will tend to have sort of a restricted diet because they're eating stuff that they tolerate well.
Right.
But ultimately, that's going to kind of perpetuate the problem. So in those kinds of situations, I think starting to add variety, but often like in a cooked format. So if we're eating like cooked vegetables, it's much easier to assimilate the nutrients than from raw vegetables.
Okay.
So if somebody's not tolerating a lot of foods, just, sort of really slowly introducing them, but primarily in a cooked format.
That's so interesting because you hear a lot today about the
Raw.
raw
Yeah.
diet being like the best thing.
Yeah,
And again, it's
yeah.
like it so depends on your type of body.
Yes,
And so it's
yeah.
like you can't just pick something.
Yeah, and if your
based off of-
digestive function is compromised anywhere, then raw may not be, the best choice for you.
Okay, very interesting there. We've learned so much today. It's been such a great conversation
It's been
with
fun.
you. So we are going to wrap up the conversation now. So thank you so much, Tracey, and to everyone else who tuned in today. If we didn't get to your question, please feel free to direct your questions to CSNN here on Facebook, and some of the grads will make sure to get back to you with any questions. I think we got through most of them today. And then you'll also be able to check out the Facebook Live posted on the school's website, csnn.ca. And we just want to say to have a good night and be well.
Good night. So going back to grain-free.
Grain-free, yes.
Commonality. Do you have any like good cookbooks that